Hello. We're going to be in Ecclesiastes chapter 3 today. It's a very famous passage of Scripture. You probably know it as a time too. I remember a few weeks ago I was watching the John Wayne movie at the Alamo. And they were sitting there knowing tomorrow was going to be the charge in which they'd all die. And the song The Green Fields of Summer came on. Time just for, and it lists all these things that are common to human beings. Growing up, young love, marriage, children, middle-age crisis, right on through. All the common things of life. That's what this is trying to pick up on. Now, there's going to be some disagreement about what each one of them means because they're kind of symbolic some ways and kind of cryptic in others. And yet this is the common things of life. Some have said, well, that means that man must be appropriate in his timing, timely in his decisions, frugal with his opportunities. It's not at all what this means. It seems that verses 1 through 8 are a series of pairs that describe the common human experience. Verses 9 through 11 interpret those experiences in light of theological categories. And the category is the sovereignty of God and the finitude of man. Well, that's pretty obvious. We could use the grass of the field. But here it's something even more significant than that. It's that man, as he looks at life, it's mysterious. He can't figure it out. Doesn't know why it happens. All men experience these same things, but all men are at a loss to the why and the how and the ins and the outs, even of the common occurrences of life. This is almost a passage on divine determinism as written from a believing agnostic. It's simply a man who says, I've tried everything and I can't understand the way life is, and yet God has put it in me to struggle to try to know, and yet I can't know. There's one more very important thing here. If you miss this, you're going to miss the entire book, I think. This is a satire. I think it's written tongue-in-cheek. I think it's written at what if there were no God? What would life be like? Repetitious, boring, nothing new, man caught in the circumstances beyond his control. The key phrase here, I think, is under the sun. The first key phrase of Ecclesiastes is vanity, vanity, all is vanity, striving after the wind. That's the way life is if it was just man and a chance universe. Life, the next little key phrase is under the sun. What if all man had was man? Oh, what a miserable thing. But man does have God. And so he brings God in very structured, measured ways. After he's shown the futility and meaninglessness of life, he brings God in. Now this chapter kind of does that. It's got some pretty difficult parts that we'll look at, but I think when you see that, you'll catch the overall thrust. So let's look then, if we could. There is an appointed time for everything. Appointed time for opportunity, or appointed time for God. It's appointed time for God. There's some other places in the Bible this appointed time is kind of used. Psalm 75:2, Psalms 102:13. The life of Jesus, you can see it very clearly when it says his hour had not yet come. John 7:6, John 7:30, John 8:20. You might want to see that. It's not a time for man to act. It's a time for God's appointed things to come. And there is a time for every event under heaven. A time to give birth and a time to die. Now that's why I don't think you can be man being opportune in his decisions. Man doesn't decide when he's born and when he dies. So I think that makes that interpretation somewhat ridiculous. The word die here can be used in the sense of sickness to the point of death. Not really physical death, but it doesn't make any difference. Really what it means by there. A time to plant, a time to uproot. This seems to me to refer to the harvest, planting and harvesting man's regular food cycle. A time to kill and a time to heal. Now, I can't refer to war because that's referred to later. What could kill refer to here? Well, maybe it's the Old Testament view of capital punishment, or a man defending himself or his home against intruders. I'm not real sure what it means there. Time to heal, of course, would be a time of getting well. A time to tear down, a time to build up. That seems to refer to the building of businesses and homes and cities. A time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn, a time to dance. Now, some would say it's a contrast between the funeral and the wedding. That may be true. Or maybe dancing at the birth of a child, that kind of thing. A time to throw stones and a time to gather stones. Now, this has been somewhat difficult to understand. The rabbis see it in a very sexual sense, where there's a time you can make love to your wife and a time you can't. And when you can't, you might as well go throw rocks in the field. It's kind of their standard interpretation of this. It could be an agricultural term, getting rocks out of a field. Other enemy may throw rocks in. It could be a term for building. You gather stones to build a house or build a wall fence. It's kind of ambiguous. We're not real sure. I think the sexual thing does have some implications. That's what the Talmud says. And if you look at the second part of verse 5, a time to embrace and a time to shun from embracing, that may fit. Now, what does embrace mean? Embrace a spouse? Love? Yes. How about embrace a relative? A grandparent? A child? Yes, that's possible. How about the time to embrace a friend? It's possible. A time to search and a time to give up what is lost. Maybe searching for knowledge here in a metaphorical sense, or something that's just been lost. A time to keep and a time to throw away. Spring cleaning is referred to, I'm not sure. A time to tear apart, a time to sew together. Many refer this to grief. The concept of the Jews taking their collars and tearing it about 6 inches as a sign of mourning. Then they'd sew it back up, reuse it. A time to be silent and a time to speak. This, again, may be an allusion to the mourning rites of the Jews. I'm not sure. A time to love, a time to hate, a time for war, a time to peace. Well, this describes many of the common things of life. Jewish interpreters use most of this to refer to the nation of Israel, but in context it seems to me to be the individual. Now, the real heart of this chapter comes in the next couple of verses, where I think these common events of human life are seen in light of their theological understanding. What profit is there to a worker from that which he toils? And that's been a common theme of Ecclesiastes. He used it in chapter 2 about you work all your life and say you're going to give it to your kids. How do you know your kids won't be a jerk and all that you've built up will be destroyed? J. Paul Getty is a pretty good example of that kind of thing. Well, look at verse 10. I have seen the task which God has given the sons of men with which to occupy themselves. Well, what is this task? Well, it seems to me to be the futility of human effort. It seems to me the idea that we're going to sow, but we don't understand what kind of reaping comes. I think it might be self-explanatory. You might want to see Galatians 3:24. You might want to see verses 14 and 18 seem to talk about this. The task that God has given man. Matter of fact, chapter 1, verse 13 may show something of the futility of the task that God has given man, that he can't know God completely. Now, verse 11 probably is the heart of this. He has made everything appropriate in its time. That's God. That's not us striking while the iron's hot, taking advantage of the opportunities. Our life is in the hand of God. Nothing just happens to God's children. You see, that's pretty Calvinistic. Well, I think Calvinistic got it from a pretty good place. He got it from the Bible. And this is one half of an equation, one half of a true equation. It's a dialectic. This is one half of the pairs. Made everything appropriate in its time. He has also set eternity in their heart. Now, King James has the word world, but that's a tough verse. What is this word world or eternity? Well, I'm looking at the 26 translations of the Bible, which gives you King James in bold print, and from the pool of 26 other translations, including many ancient versions, give you some opportunity to see how other folks have translated this. The Hebrew word seems to mean hiddenness, mystery. Here's some other translations. God has set eternity in their heart. Listen to this one. God has, but for the mind of man, he has appointed mystery that man may never fathom God's own purpose from the beginning to the end. Listen to this one. He has made everything right in its time, but he has made their hearts without knowledge, so that man is unable to see the works of God from the first to the last. Listen to this one. He has made everything suit its time. Moreover, he has given men a sense of time, past and future, but no comprehension of God's work from the beginning to the end. Here's another one. All that he does is apt for its time. But though he has permitted men to consider time in its wholeness, man cannot comprehend the work of God from the beginning to the end. Well, you see something of the struggle here we have with this word. God has given us something of His image, which I think is consciousness, the ability to contemplate the future, to contemplate our own existence, to recognize past, present, and future, to have a volitional choice. We have that ability, but somehow in the fall, the ability to put all that together has eluded us, or we've rebelled it away, maybe it's a better way to put it. So some would say we contemplate the future, we look at the outcome but can't understand it. So possibly we sense our own destiny but don't understand how it works out. It's the hiddenness mystery of God. God's put the desire in our heart, but I think we, in our fall, have not been able to handle it. Yet so man will not find out the whole which God has done from the beginning to the end. I want to say here, when it comes to knowledge about God, a lot of modern philosophers, particularly in study of language, have said we can't truly talk about God. There's truth in that. The only thing we can use is human analogies. We know something about God, something about His purposes, something about reality, something about truth, but nothing exhaustive. Only in analogy, only in negation can we fathom those kind of depths. And yet we hunger for that kind of truth. Now I think 12 and 13 is another key to this chapter. Men experience life pretty much the same. They have a hunger to understand it, but they can't. Now, religious man comes to that with a faith perspective. He views life in a certain way. Well, how do we view life if we're religious? How do we view that? What kind of perspective do we have? How are we to see this mystery of God that permeates all of human beings' life? Well, 12 and 13 give us a perspective. I know there is nothing better for them than to rejoice and to do good in one's lifetime. You mean that happiness in what we have, a sense of contentment, a sense in seeing that daily life and all its mundaneness is good and enjoyable? Yes, yes. Now look at verse 13. Very, very important. Moreover, that every man, now here are three things that all men do again, who eats, who drinks, and sees good in his labor, this is a gift from God. The simple pleasures of life are from God. Enjoy them. We may not be able to fathom the universe. We may not be able to understand our own destiny. We believe that those things are in the hand of a loving Creator, Redeemer, purposeful God. But we can't figure them out. So what do? We quit striving for that which we cannot attain, and we look around us at the things that God has given us that brings us great joy. I want you to get a pencil because I want you to write down the other places in Ecclesiastes this wonderful truth about life is given. Chapter 2, verse 24. Chapter 3, verse 22. Chapter 15, 18. Chapter 6, 12. Chapter 8, 15. Chapter 9, 7. This is a common theme. Life is good with the right perspective. Now, gift of God. Some say this means life's simple pleasures. Others say the gift is a perspective on life. I think it's both. Look at verse 14. I know that everything God does will remain forever. There is nothing to add to it. There is nothing to take from it. For God has so worked that men should fear Him. You mean something in the inability of man to fathom everything is really also a gift from God? A gift from God to keep man dependent on Him instead of being independent, which is the source of Adam's sin and Satan's sin and man's sin? Yes. Something of the mystery keeps us tied to God. Look at verse 15. That which is has been already, and that which will be has already been. For God seeks what is passed by. Oh my, what a killer verse. Back to my little help in study. Now listen to this. The King James is, that which has been is now, and that which it has been already has been, and God requireth that which is past. God requireth that which is past. Now my New American Standard seem to say that God seeks what is passed by. Is God looking for a repetition in the cycle of men's lives? That's very possible from the context. What are some other things that God may be seeking? God seeketh that which has been chased away. What is that? Maybe man understanding fully back in the Garden of Eden before the fall. Maybe that's where the image was marred, needs to be restored. Maybe so. Listen to this one. God seeketh again that which is passed away. That's American Standard. God makes a search for things which are past. The repetition, apparently. He is ever repeating history. That's a Knox translation. Listen to this one. And whatever is to come has already been, and God summons each event back in its turn. I think those are all good, but I think following my friend Loophole, which is my favorite commentator, if I can, in the Old Testament, this is his book on Ecclesiastes, he says it means that God seeks that one, not that thing, but that person which has been persecuted or pursued. Maybe that godly person who has been treated unfairly in life, God makes a special effort to find and reveal and speak to them. I like the personal element here, though in context that things never change and yet God is in control. Fits the larger context better. Notice in verse 16, here's the key phrase I told you about. Furthermore, I have seen under the sun. This little key phrase, under the sun, under the sun, under the sun, in my opinion, is the author's way of saying, look, what would life be like if there were no God? It'd be the repetitious cycle of 1 through 8 that nobody could explain. Some die young, some live old, some have birth defects, some are healthy, some have good marriages, some have divorce, some are rich, some are poor, some are soldiers, some are pacifists, and yet there's mystery there. How do we ever know? We can't know if there's no God. It's just the way men are. But look at this. In verse 16, that in the place of justice, I think that means the law court, there is wickedness. It means a bending of that which is right or straight. The bending of the rich is a literal thing here. Excuse me, I think it's the bending of the right. In the place of righteousness, there is wickedness. I think he means the house of God, the religious aspect. The place you should have found justice in the court system and among God's people and God's worship. No, there's no justice there. Things that should happen don't happen. Things that shouldn't happen do happen. Well, he gives two answers to that. Here they are. First one's in verse 17. God said, I'm going to judge both the righteous and the wicked. God's going to set things straight. You know what they're saying? For a time for every matter and every deed is there. God says, I'm going to set things straight. This may be one or two things. It's the view of the Old Testament that God's going to do it now. It's temporal. He's going to do it in this lifetime. But it seems to me implied there's an unfairness now and God's going to set it straight. It's got to be either in a later part of man's life or in the afterlife, which becomes the implication from all of these man struggling with evil. If God is just and he's going to set things straight and this world's not fair, there's got to be an afterlife to set it straight. And that's what I think this is talking about. And then the second answer is in verse 18. And I said to myself concerning the sons of men, God has surely tested them in order for them to see that they are but beasts. Why would God want us to see that we're but an animal? I think it goes back again to this Genesis thing. It is true that we have much in common with the animals that inhabit the earth. We breathe the same air. We procreate the same way. We have to intake food. We have to excrete waste. We have blood that transfers. We have much in common with the animals of this planet. The fact that we do is probably something to keep us a little bit more humble. Well, what is this saying exactly? Well, God's going to test us for the purpose of what? Showing us that without God, we're just animal. Life is nothing more than a biological series. And then you die and you're fertilizer. Is that what life's about? If there is no God, that's what it's about. Now, this word surely tested, it means to purify or to prove. God tests all of his creatures. Let me give you a few references. I want you to look these up now. Genesis 22:1, God tested Abraham. Exodus 16:4. Exodus 20, verse 20. Deuteronomy 8:2. Deuteronomy 8:16. Deuteronomy 13:3. Judges 2:22. 2 Chronicles 32:31. Yes, God tests his creatures. Why? To hurt them? No, to make them trust him more. To help them see who they are. To help them see who he is. And to help them act in faith on his self-revelation. Because if God doesn't reveal to us what this whole chapter is saying, man can't find God in his search. It's impossible. Now, I would like to have the man of Ecclesiastes, Coleth, alive today, where he could see what Jesus has revealed to us. The fullness of God's revelation did come in time. It came progressively in the Old. It came ultimately in a person, and it came through men who uniquely interpreted that person and his implications for us. God has revealed. We can know. But at this stage, if God doesn't reveal, man cannot find God. You know, the world religions are man trying to find God. Christianity is uniquely and wonderfully God finding man and revealing to him his need. Now look at verse 19. 19 is a play on the word beast. The fate of the sons of men and the fate of beasts are the same. He's playing on this common element. If there is no God, this is the implication here, and it's shocking. As one dies, so dies the other. Indeed, they will all have the same breath. Now the word breath is the Hebrew word nephesh. In Genesis chapter 7, verse 22, as well as earlier in Genesis, all the animals have nephesh. Not just man, all the animals, the beasts of the fields, they have the life of God too. God is the only source of light. He gave it to animals. He gave it to man. When man dies, the breath is gone. When animal dies, the breath is gone. There is no advantage for man over the beast. All is vanity. Now that's true if there is no God. If there is no God, we're just animals. There's no purpose in our life. There's no meaning in our death. There's no afterlife. Just these common events that are common to man, and many of them are common to animals. Verse 20 through 22, it kind of interprets this. All go to the same place. All came from the dust. All return to the dust. Well, there's truth in that. Genesis 3:19, we were formed out of the dust as the animals were. Now we were formed as a unique creation of God, the animals by a spoken creation of God. Psalms 103:14, Psalms 104:29, we are dust. We're going to return to dust. So are animals. What's the advantage then? Look at verse 21. Who knows that the breath of man ascends upward and the breath of beast descends downward to the earth? If God doesn't tell us, man can't find out these mysteries beyond life. How do we know? How do we know? We can't know. There's a longing in our heart to know, but without the self-revelation of God, we can't know. Without God, life is the pits. It's existential, biological series, period. The strongest survives. That's it. Now, verse 22 has been used by many to say, by the way, this word who knows in verse 21 is used in chapter 2, verse 19, and 6, verse 12 to introduce a question. I believe verse 21 is a question. I do not believe verse 22 is a question. Now, in my little translation here of all those 26 translations, let me see, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I have six translations. All of them put questions. Where do I get off? I'm not a Hebrew scholar by any means. I've had a couple of years of Hebrew, but I am not a Hebrew scholar. My favorite commentator, Loophole, is where I'm getting this from. I hope you'll buy this book by Loophole. Buy all of his books. They're wonderful. He says that the interrogative hey that starts the question of verse 21 is also the definite article. And sometimes it's an interrogative, and sometimes it's an article. There are two heys, one in verse 21, one in verse 22. But he gives many examples in his technical teaching of this on the places in the Hebrew where the exact same word order or syntax is used, and all of them are the article. So I would say verse 22 is not a question, it's an affirmation. Now, here, read my New American Standard. And I have seen that nothing is better than a man should be happy in his activities, for that is his lot. For who will bring him to see what occurs after him? Now, in verse 21, there are two questions, and here's a question in verse 22. I'm not sure if verse 21 and 22 should both be questions. It seems to me that what we're saying is, can we know that the breath goes up or down? Now, if you look at chapter 12, verse 7, chapter 12, verse 7, it says we know the Spirit goes back to God. I think he's saying, if we didn't have God, we wouldn't know. But since we do have God, we know that man is not exactly like the animals. They both have life from God. They both eat. They both procreate. They both live on the earth. But the truth is, in death, there is a difference. Man goes back to God who created him. The animals go back to the earth from which they were created. And I think that's what's occurring here. People wonder, does verse 22 talk about an afterlife, what will occur after him? Well, it could mean that man doesn't know future events. That's obvious. That there is a repetition in nature and history. That's obvious. But could it be that since if we turn 21 into an affirmation, that man is going to go be with God, that in a sense he can know what's after him, but he can't know it right now, and someone who's gone on can't come back and tell us. So we only have God's revealed truth. The book. The Bible. God has told us who we are. He has told us who he is. We can search, we can experiment, but we can't discover God. But God has chosen to reveal himself to us. Now, the one thing I would say is Jesus really fulfills this. We see more and more as the Old Testament progresses. This man didn't have it. This man's conclusion is God does love us. God has revealed himself. There is a God. I'm going to enjoy life. I don't know why I'm here versus here. I don't know why this happened or this happened. I don't know why this problem came or that problem came, but I do believe that God is here, that he does love me, that life is good because God created it good, but there are some problems and mysteries that I can't find the answer, so I'm going to enjoy every day, one day at a time, with the simple pleasures of life, food, spouse, children and relatives, the labor of my life. I'm going to take joy in that. And God will work it out. That's not half bad. And when you know the rest about Jesus, you get plumb giddy about who God is and what he's done for us. Perspective on life. I've enjoyed being with you. God bless you. Have a good day.